Hi and welcome to Mondraker TV. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the Zero suspension system. Now this is our own patented platform that you can see variations of on every single full suspension bike that we make. There are many different suspension designs out on the mountain bike market, and each of them are variations of two major designs, the single pivot and the 4-bar style design. Now both of them are great designs, but it's the characteristics from the 4-bar by having that additional linkage that really appeal to Mondraker designers. It enables us to tune specific parts of the suspension kinematics. Now compared to a single pivot where the rear wheel axle is connected directly to the front triangle, the 4-bar, having a linkage in between those, enables our designers to tune things like anti-squat and anti-rise individually at individual parts of the travel. That's the key to our system. And this is why our designers wanted to design the Zero system. Now functionally, it works by having a linkage connecting the front and rear of the bike. You have a rocker on the seat tube here that drives the shock from the top. Now note when you look at the shock, it's actually driven from the linkage at the bottom, like a floating shock driven from both sides. Now this design uses a virtual pivot point. I'm going to pick up on that a bit later. Now although the suspension design looks the same across the board on all of our bikes, the coolest thing about us having the Zero suspension platform is that each bike has a tailored version of it. And we're talking from the kids 24-inch Factor all the way up to the Summum downhill race bike. They all have slightly optimized versions of the suspension system that's going to appeal to them. The cross-country bike needs to be incredibly supple but supportive, whereas for example the downhill bike needs to have support and control in the roughest terrain. No one of our bikes has the same exact system on it. Okay, so you've had the overview of what the system looks like. Now let's talk about a few of the characteristics so you can better understand how Zero works. Now Zero has meaning. The first thing is zero power loss. Now as part of the design, our designers have put a lot of anti-squat on most of our bikes. Now what this means is your pedaling is not going to compress the suspension, so you're not going to be wasting energy compressing that suspension when you're pedaling. Your pedaling turns into forward propulsion. It's very efficient. Because of the fact that the Zero system is individually tailored for every single Mondraker full suspension bike, the anti-squat and the anti-rise numbers are different for every single bike. It is very beneficial because a cross-country bike has very different requirements to what a downhill bike does. Now despite the fact a lot of our bikes have a lot of anti-squat to make them really efficient, they still remain to be incredibly sensitive at the first part of the travel. This translates to lots of comfort for you and lots of grip and traction on those tyres. Now on Mondraker bikes you will see shocks from brands like Fox and Öhlins. Now a lot of these shocks will have things like climb switches like this, but the cool thing about our suspension system is it's so efficient that you don't need to rely on this to make the bikes good for climbing. You can run the bike completely open and it will climb really, really well. Another benefit to the Zero system is zero pedal kickback. Now because of the way our suspension designers have designed the back end of the bike, you get almost no chain growth on there, so the chainstay length remains consistent through the axle path. What this means is you're not going to get any harshness feeling through the pedals as the suspension is being activated. Okay, and the last one is Zero brake jack. Now the effects of braking on the rear suspension is known as anti-rise, and this falls into two major things. There's brake jack and there's brake squat. So brake jack will mean your rear suspension will extend, pitching your body weight forwards when you're using that rear brake. What this does is it firms up the rear suspension, meaning the wheel can actually break traction as well as it feeling harsh. Now brake squat is the opposite. As you use the rear brake, it can compress the rear suspension. So this can be beneficial, but it can also firm up the suspension. The Zero system, because of this, has a very neutral feeling rear end. And the idea is, whether you're using the brake or not, the suspension is free to operate and just move around. The benefits to this when you're riding is the suspension is going to be doing its job the whole time, whether you're pedaling, you're coasting, or you're using the brakes. Now, all of the things I've just mentioned with the Zero system are possible because of the virtual pivot point system. Now, I referred to this earlier in the video, and essentially the most important thing is something called the instant center. Now, imagine drawing a line through this pivot point and drawing a line through this one. Where it meets is known as the instant center. And the beauty of this system is our designers can control where this point is at any point during the travel. And this is directly responsible for influencing anti-rise and anti-squat. At the beginning of the video, I told you that every version of the Zero suspension platform was tailored for different bikes because of different requirements. When MTBs came along, they had a whole different feeling compared to regular mountain bikes, and accordingly, our designers developed the Zero e-bike optimized version. Now, you've got to bear in mind that bikes like the Crusher and bikes like the Crafty are substantially heavier than conventional bikes like the Rays that you saw earlier in the video. On top of that, there's loads of torque that goes through the system, so the power that goes down, the power delivery to the rear wheel, really does have an effect on the suspension, so more support had to be built into the Zero platform. And also, because of the fact that bikes are so much heavier, they needed to have more progression as well. Now, usually, if you put too much progression into a bike, it can end up feeling harsh. But the beauty of the big full power e-bikes is the sprung to unsprung mass ratio completely levels this out, and the suspension just feels amazing. Okay, and you can probably notice in front of me here, the Neat has yet again another configuration. Now, this is known as a low power or a light e-bike. Now, what our designers discovered on the prototyping stage when testing the bikes was the requirements were completely different yet again. And it turns out with bikes like this, your leg input has far more of an impact on the rear suspension, like on the anti-squat, than the motor power does. So what they had to do was increase the anti-squat on the back end, but also there's a few other things they had to factor in, which is why the bike looks like this. So because it has a smaller battery housed into the down tube there, you can also have the range extender batteries. Now, when you carry a range extender on the bike, it leaves no room for a water bottle. And our designers wanted to make sure you could fit a water bottle on the top mount here and a range extender here. But to do that, they had to drop the rocker down. So the whole configuration has changed slightly. So you've got more anti-squat built in to resist the squatting that comes from your leg power. And then by moving the shock down here, they actually gave more room for longer drop seat posts and ended up having to make the shock compress from the rear triangle. They also used a slightly shorter shock and a slightly higher leverage ratio to give the shock more sensitivity despite the fact it has more anti-squat. Awesome stuff. Just goes to prove the fact that the design is changed across the board with our bikes. Now, you probably noticed this design is very similar to the F-Podium cross-country bike we just released, and also, of course, to the prototype downhill bike that's out there. So every single bike in our range has a different variation of the Zero suspension platform. Now, hopefully this video has been useful to sort of underline some of the principles about our system. If you've got any questions, please do get involved in the comments underneath. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for free content. Thanks for watching.